After 29 years, we finally learn the secret story as to how Son Goku came to Earth. Did we need to know it? Probably not, but we're here anyway. It's Dragon Ball Dissection Gaiden. There aren't many action scenes, and no cool characters appear. It won't make you emotional, there are no thrills or suspense, and of course, it's not the sort of wholesome work that will remain in your heart. Wow, Toriyama, don't hype this up too much. Personally, as a writer, it has my number one favorite story and protagonist out of anything I've done in the past. Okay, that's a bit better. Ginga Patroru Jaco, or Jaco the Galactic Patrolman, is a 10 or 11 or 12 installment limited series for Weekly Shonen Jump, written and drawn by Toriyama Akira in 2013. Apparently this was supposed to be released in tandem with Battle of Gods, which we covered last time. However, Toriyama got behind on his work, so it didn't start its run until 4 months after the movie. Apparently, when you get to be someone of Toriyama's stature, the companies you work for just go, that's okay. Don't worry about the corporate synergy we were literally banking on. Just get it to us when you can. So why am I covering this in Dragon Ball Dissection when it's not Dragon Ball? Toriyama drew lots of limited series across his career, and I haven't covered all of those. Well, that's because Jaco the Galactic Patrolman informs pretty much everything in the revival era of Dragon Ball from this point on. And I don't mean in subtle, obscure ways that only the nerdiest of nerds would care about. This is stuff that permeates every inch of Dragon Ball Super. The Galactic Patrol that Goku and Vegeta work for an entire story arc is from Jaco. The Galactic King that Goku gets a little too friendly with is from Jaco. Bluma's older sister and Goku's mother are both introduced in Jaco. The entire backstory of the destruction of planet Vegeta that would later be adapted in the Broli movie and expanded on in the Dragon Ball Super manga was created in Jaco. And of course, Jaco himself, who would become a major player in Dragon Ball stories from this point on, was introduced in Jaco. This might not officially be part of any Dragon Ball series, but really, it's required reading. Certainly more so than most actual Dragon Ball films are required viewing. Amazingly though, the rabbit hole goes even deeper. The concept of the Galactic Patrol dates back to two one-shots called Sachie-chan Gu and Gia, released in 2008 and 2010 respectively. They were both collaborations between Toriyama and manga author Katsura Masakazu, known for, among other things, Video Girl Ai, and for being the person who inspired the concept of fusion during the Majin Buu arc. While they certainly share some ideas and aesthetics, a lot of the specific details are different between these two stories in Jaco, so it's not really clear if they're even supposed to be in any kind of continuity with each other. Sachie-chan and Gia certainly don't have any direct narrative connections to either Jaco or Dragon Ball. They really just share the idea of the existence of a galactic patrol sending officers down to an Earth for various reasons. At the very least, Sachie-chan and Gia served as concepts of inspiration for Toriyama to return to, this time by himself. Jaco the Galactic Patrolman makes no big secret about being connected to Dragon Ball, while Toriyama opens the series being rather coy about it, only stating there's a reason this story might have a retro feel to it. Other aspects are less subtle, or rather, they begin to pile up in a way that becomes hard to ignore. Jaco's mission on Earth is to stop an alien invader. The second a character named Tights enters the story, it should be pretty obvious to whose lineage she belongs. Jump just went ahead and removed any pretense by loudly declaring this to be the revival of Dragon Ball. And then there's the complicated chapter numbering system. While the series starts at Chapter 1 and continues in a logical fashion, there's more to it. Each chapter has a little graphic on its first page showing the chapter number over 10 plus 1. That's to indicate that, for example, this is chapter 1 out of a total of 10 plus 1 chapters. Then, below that, there's another counting system, this one counting down. The first chapter is DB-11, followed by DB-10, and so on and so forth. I can't imagine anyone not immediately realizing, or at least suspecting, what DB stands for. So yeah, there's a lot of weird math in the numbering, but they fit within their own twisted logic. The counting down to Dragon Ball makes sense as it's a Dragon Ball prequel. The title of the bonus chapter in the collected release, Dragon Ball Minus, makes sense when you put it in context of this DB minus blank countdown. But why this 10 plus 1 gobbledygook? Why isn't it just 11? With all the important Dragon Ball connections I mentioned, you might think that Jaco's story is entirely preoccupied with Dragon Ball, but it really isn't. At least, not for the most part. As I mentioned when I covered Nekomajin earlier this year, Jaco is something of an inverse of that series. Nekomajin would evolve, or devolve depending on your perspective, into a holding pin for Dragon Ball references. Oh, here's the chapter where Vegeta shows up. Oh, here's the chapter where Majin Buu shows up. Jaco is not like that at all, hence the numbering. See, in the main 10 chapters, the connection to Dragon Ball stays completely in the background. Yes, Jaco comes to Earth to prevent the arrival of who we eventually learn is Goku, but that isn't made explicit in the main story. His mission is simply the impetus for Jaco traveling to Earth, after which it's mainly brushed aside in favor of his more immediate concern. Jaco has damaged his ship and needs to find a way to repair it. Yes, there is a main character named Tights, but her family isn't directly referenced in the main 10 chapters. All of that explicit Dragon Ball stuff is sequestered away in chapter plus 1 at the very end. After the very end. I assume that's why it's numbered the way it is. I can see how that could be annoying to some people that it appears Jaco the Galactic Patrolman is dangling a carrot on a stick, teasing its audience with the implied promise of a Dragon Ball prequel so they'll follow along with this new series, only to hold off on delivering the goods until the last possible minute. But I actually really like that. It allows Jaco the Galactic Patrolman to have its own identity. If this whole series was just a collection of, hey, this is how this thing in Dragon Ball happens, the constant barrage of vacuous fan service would force my eyes to roll into the back of my head and out the other side. If Tights only existed as a conduit to introduce younger versions of her more famous family members, I would hate it. But since the story establishes her as her own character first, I already like her, not for who she's connected to, but for who she is. As such, I'm more willing to accept the cameos in chapter plus 1. It's the perfect have your cake and eat it too structure. Jaco gets to be its own story with its own characters and its own identity, and fine, you can have this one chapter where we explicitly connect it to Dragon Ball while still building on that fun original story. And then a bonus chapter that has no time to tell a story because it's too busy dumping out tortured, boring fan service exposition. Yeah, I'm a little less forgiving toward that one, but I've already covered Dragon Ball Minus. Now that you know what Jaco the Galactic Patrolman is and how it works, let's get into it. Jaco, some might even say the Galactic Patrolman, is flying to Earth in his spaceship. He's distracted by a video he's watching, however, causing him to bounce into the moon and crash into the sea just off the island of one Omori Tokunoshin. Omori is a theoretical physicist who was brought to this island to work on a secret government project. Since the whole thing literally blew up in their faces, Omori continues to live on the island alone. He's still grieving the loss of his wife who died in the accident, and he doesn't like other people, but he agrees to take Jaco in and help him fix his ship. If you think I took too long to get to the story dissecting part of this dissection, that's somewhat in line with the story itself. Jaco the Galactic Patrolman moves at a very leisurely pace. And yeah, sometimes leisurely is just used as a diplomatic euphemism for slow. Here, though, I mean that in the best sense of the word. Jaco is far more character-driven than plot-driven. The plot is just an excuse to get these two men together so they can play off of each other. Jaco is wacky and mercurial and full of himself. Omori is the straight man. He's a bit cantankerous and misanthropic, but generally kind-hearted and even-keeled. For the first few chapters, they don't really do all that much other than get to know each other. They talk about their respective lives, their attitudes, they bicker and help each other with their problems. It comes across rather like a two-person stage play. It's interesting, so many times a story will get bogged down in exposition, characters inelegantly vomiting out plot, just to get it done. Here, there is also a lot of exposition in the dialogue, but it's not really serving a plot purpose. We don't learn that Jaco is the third tallest member of the Galactic Patrol, or that he carries an extinction bomb that can wipe out humanity with a virus because they are plot points we need to know for later. Instead, those pieces of information are there to set up jokes that teach us about the characters. Jaco brags about how his height measures up because he's very sensitive about how short he is. The bomb exists because Omori's horrified reaction to it immediately demonstrates that his grousing about humans being awful is largely just that. Throughout this story, Omori is constantly holding back Jaco's worst impulses, trying to protect other people from his antics. Through his experiences, Omori learns more about himself, that he does care about people, that he actually is open to forming a new family. Not to say that it's too sentimental, Toriyama wouldn't have that. Omori's development is more of an undercurrent. Even when Omori explains his tragic backstory that resulted in the death of his wife, the seriousness is undercut by Jaco being too distracted by the existence of roaches to pay attention. Other exposition is spiced up by Jaco performing Galactic Patrol poses during it. When Omori questions why he's doing that, Jaco admits it makes things more exciting. Toriyama is honest in his self-deprecating remarks about the story. This isn't the bombastic fighting of Dragon Ball, although there is action and fighting in it. It's not the absurd laugh-a-minute gags of Dr. Slump, although there is plenty of humor. But even that humor isn't in the vein of the gross-out or titillating variety that Toriyama is often known for. What this story is cozy. In fact, I think of this as what would play out as a conversation between Toriyama and Toriyama. I'm doing quite a bit of projecting here, so I could be completely off base. I certainly never had the privilege of meeting Toriyama Akira during his lifetime. Omori is isolationist, distrustful of authority. That seems to track with how reclusive Toriyama became later in life. Jaco is flamboyant and braggadocious, but not quite able to back up all the talk, very much in the vein of Toriyama's favorite swaggering characters like Senbei or Mr. Satan. The word Jaco refers to tiny fish that are used to season rice, but can also be read as referring to someone who's a small fry. Omori, by contrast, means a full portion of food. See how they fit together? The story begins to develop with the arrival of Katayude of the government police. He's here to inform Omori that he's living on this island illegally and has to move within a week, despite Omori's protestations that he's the only one who's maintained the island for all these years and that his wife's grave is here. As Katayude departs, he spies Jaco, who had been hiding on a cliff. Jaco expresses his regret that Omori will have to leave the island. Omori thinks this is a sign of solidarity, but in true Jaco fashion, Jaco is more concerned that Omori won't be able to fix his ship before then. Still, he's not completely unsympathetic and decides to get even with Katayude by throwing a rock across the sea, sinking his ship. Jaco eventually realizes that what Omori had been hired to work on and is still secretly working on is a time machine. Apparently time travel is forbidden and strongly punished by galactic law, so Jaco discourages him from continuing. While Omori admits his motive is to save those who died in the accident, including his wife, he assures Jaco he hasn't had any success. All his machine can do is briefly speed up the user's perception of time, rendering the world as so slow that time effectively stops. It's basically super speed. Jaco reluctantly agrees that maybe that doesn't break the law. Still, to a Dragon Ball fan who's reading and has realized the connection, This immediately raises some red flags given that time travel has been a major conceit in that story. What I'm impressed by is that Toriyama actually foreshadows Omori's relationship to time travel in the first chapter, as he is shown reading a book by Herbert George Wells, more commonly known as H.G. Wells. And while I haven't been able to find any evidence the real H.G. Wells ever wrote a story called Hours of Operation, is it possible that's just a really bad translation of The Time Machine? Omori discovers the material in Jaco's spaceship that he believes might be the fuel source they need to replace. Unfortunately, that material is sky gold, which, true to its name, is prohibitively expensive. As the two struggle to figure out a way to raise the money, they plan a trip into town to buy food, as Jaco only eats cheese and milk. This night trip into the city is the perfect time to talk about the art. I think this series looks really good. Toriyama said he was going for a picture book style with Jaco. Because of that, he drew the entire thing digitally. While he complained about it actually taking longer and resulting in less of a sense of speed than when he was drawing traditionally, he reasoned the relative lack of action scenes made it a decent choice regardless. I like the cute round designs. Jaco is pretty simplistic looking, with really basic lines that give him an alien appearance. Omori is squat and cartoony, but his face is amazingly detailed. I think the computer-based process is why Toriyama was able to use so much screen tone, something he typically never did during Dragon Ball due to how time-consuming it was. The lack of it gives Toriyama's art a very clean look, but the screen tone in Jaco looks good. It gives objects and backgrounds a lot of texture and depth, and allows for 3 chapters in a row to take place entirely at night. Remember that that's something that rarely happens in Dragon Ball, especially later in the series. I like it. However, something I hope you haven't been noticing is the opposite pages bleeding through. This is another one of those instances where I had to make my own scans and frantically clean them up while working on the last several videos. And that screen tone made it very difficult for me to even out all of the color variations that would bleed through during scanning. I'm doing the best I can in the time that I have. Jaco in the city provides the first really big opportunity for hijinks. Jaco is itching to bring down the hammer of justice on anybody for anything, while Omori just wants them to keep a low profile so that it doesn't get out that Jaco is an alien. There's really only so much Omori can do though, especially after an old lady rewards Jaco with money for saving her from a purse snatcher. Once again, the Dragon Ball references remain pretty subtle. This very much feels like the kinds of encounters Goku would find himself in while visiting the city for the first time. This also demonstrates an example of how the series tries to distance itself from Dragon Ball, to maybe throw people off the trail. The currency in use in this story is yen, not the ubiquitous Dragon Ball Zeni. The names Jaco, Omori, and Katayude aren't the kinds of names you often hear in Dragon Ball. They're very Japanese jokes, whereas Dragon Ball more often has character names based on English or Western words. While Omori is away shopping, Jaco can't help but jump in while a girl is being accosted by a bunch of cosplayers? Actually, the cast of extras in this city are quite interesting to look at, dressed in all eras of fashion. There are probably tons of Toriyama character references I haven't even yet noticed. Jaco swoops in, beats up the ruffians after they insult his height, and then beats up the cops who come in to quell the fight. That's a problem, so Jaco, Omori, and the girl have to hoof it up to the roof of a building to hide out. When the girl introduces herself as Tights, Omori comments that that's a Western name. Without beating you over the head with it, it provides a pretty obvious clue as to whom Tights is related. This information, while relevant to its own story, adds some trivia to the Dragon Ball world. They're in the Eastern Metropolis right now. These characters have Japanese-sounding names, not to mention surnames, something else that has been stated to not be typical in the world of Dragon Ball. But you know who will have both of those very soon? Son Goku, who grows up in the East. So Jaco implies an East-West cultural divide, at least at this earlier point in the timeline. By extension, possibly spurred on by later events of this story, it also implies a greater Western proliferation in the fictional world's future. Anyway, Tights quickly figures out that Jaco is an alien and is excited by it rather than afraid. Jaco is such a show-off, as always, that when he introduces himself, he has to do it by posing on the railing on the edge of the roof. Naturally, the cops spot him immediately and their cover is blown. That's where we get that oft-promoted image of Jaco rocketing his newfound friends to safety. They fly to the harbor and retreat back to the island. However, Jaco's troubles are just beginning. Not only did they have to leave their food behind, Jaco is now all over the news. Or at least, their interpretation of him is. To Jaco's absolute horror, the newscasters are referring to him as Mask Man, which is a very lame name and not accurate because that's his face, thank you very much. They're also describing him as 145 centimeters tall when he is very clearly 148 centimeters. Oh, also he's wanted for beating up all those people. Believe it or not, we've made it through over 100 pages of manga today. I've been working really hard lately, so I think I've long since earned myself a multi-part video. That is my typical format anyway, and I haven't gotten to do it all year. I've been cramming everything from a single topic into one video, and it's been killing me. We're about halfway through the series right now, so we'll pick it up next time with the conclusion to Jaco the Galactic Patrolman. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying these dives into all these varied Dragon Ball stories. If you are, please let me know. I need your engagement on this video and your support through Patreon to keep being able to do this for a living. You can find the link on the end screen and in the description. Check out my other video series, including Donkey Kong Dissection, a deep dive into Donkey Kong video games, which will be returning soon with Donkey Kong Country Returns. And Ozeo, where I compare Power Rangers Zeo to its Japanese counterpart. I'll see you next time!